My twin sister's funeral was too quiet. At the graveside, I got a text from an unknown number. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. I typed back, who are you? Can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our parents. Then I discovered the truth left me speechless. The rain in Flint, Michigan, doesn't just fall, it punishes. It's a cold, metallic drizzle that smells of rusted iron and broken dreams. On this particular Tuesday, the sky was a bruised purple, weeping over the freshly dug earth of St. Jude's Cemetery. I stood at the edge of the pit, my knuckles white as I gripped the handle of a black umbrella that felt far too light for the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. Across from me stood my parents. My mother, Margaret, clutched a lace handkerchief to her eyes, her shoulders shaking in a rhythmic, practiced sob. My father, Arthur, stood rigid, his face a mask of stoic grief, though his eyes kept darting toward the sleek black Cadillac parked at the cemetery gates, the car Chelsea's money had bought him just 3 weeks ago. Inside that polished mahogany casket lay Chelsea. My twin. My mirror. The girl who had held my hand when we hid in the crawlspace while our parents smashed plates in the kitchen. She was 33. She was supposed to have 70 more years of sea breezes and sunsets in Cape Cod. Instead, she was a statistic, a victim of a freak maritime accident. Ashes to ashes, the priest droned, his voice competing with the thunder. As the first shovel of dirt hit the wood with a hollow, sickening thud, my pocket vibrated. It was a sharp, aggressive buzz. I ignored it. Then it happened again. And again. A frantic rhythm. I pulled the phone out, my thumb trembling. It was a text from an unknown number. My breath hitched. The screen was smeared with raindrops, blurring the words, but as I wiped it clear, the world around me went silent. The priest's voice vanished. The sound of the rain died. I'm alive, Scott. That's not me in the box. Don't look up. Don't trust them. Run. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it hit a wall. I looked down at the casket. If Chelsea wasn't in there, who was? I felt a sudden, predatory gaze on me. I looked up, and for a split second, I caught my father looking at me, not with sympathy, but with a sharp, piercing scrutiny. He wasn't mourning. He was watching for a reaction. I tucked the phone away, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had to get out. I had to know if this was a cruel joke or a lifeline from the grave. To understand the poison running through our family's veins, you have to understand where we came from. We weren't raised in a home, we were raised in a war zone. Flint in the 90s was a skeletal remains of a city. My father was a plumber who hated his life, and my mother was a cashier who felt she was destined for royalty and cheated by fate. Chelsea and I were mistakes that cost too much. We were the extra mouths that kept them from the vacations they deserved. I remember one winter, the heater broke. The house was so cold we could see our breath indoors. Arthur came home smelling of cheap bourbon and failure. When Chelsea asked if we could have an extra blanket, he didn't answer with words. He threw a chair. I was 6 minutes older. In twin logic, that meant I was the shield. I pushed Chelsea under the kitchen table and took the brunt of the shouting. That was our life. A series of calculated retreats and whispered promises. One day, Scott, she'd whisper, her blue eyes, identical to mine, shining in the dark. We'll have a house where the windows don't rattle and the people don't scream. Chelsea was the brilliant one. She studied by candlelight when the power was cut. She earned a full ride to a university in Boston. I stayed behind. I took a job at the auto parts factory, my hands permanently stained with oil and grease, just so I could send her $50 a week for groceries. Then she met James. James was everything our family wasn't. He was old money from Cape Cod, a doctor with a soul of gold. When they got married, I stood there in a rented tuxedo feeling like a gargoyle in a palace. Our parents were there too, acting like they'd been the ones who fostered her genius, their eyes widening as they took in the seaside mansion and the private yacht, the Blue Seraph. But tragedy follows the Newmans like a shadow. 3 years into the marriage, James was diagnosed with an aggressive genetic disorder. He withered away in months. Chelsea was devastated, but James had made sure she would never want for anything again. He left her $30 million. And that was when the wolves started circling. Not strangers. Not scammers. Parents. The transformation was nauseating. Within a month of James's funeral, Margaret and Arthur had reconciled with the daughter they used to call a burden. They were constantly at her Cape Cod estate, whispering in her ear about family loyalty and unpaid debts of upbringing. "Scott, I think they've changed," Chelsea told me over the phone one night. She sounded exhausted. The grief of losing James had left her defenses down. "They're being so supportive. Mom wants us all to go on a healing trip on the yacht. Just the family. No lawyers, no distractions." "Chelsea, don't," I warned. "They don't want to heal. They want to harvest. They're my parents, Scott. I have to try." The plan was set for a 4-day excursion along the coast. But 24 hours before departure, the script flipped. My mother called me, her voice a theatrical tremor. "Scott, your father, he's collapsed. The doctors say it's severe pneumonia. We can't go. But we've told Chelsea she must go. She needs the sea air. We've hired the best crew. You go with her, honey. Protect her." My gut turned into a knot of lead. If Dad is sick, shouldn't she stay here? No. She's been through so much. Let her have this peace. Promise me. I went. I stepped onto the Blue Seraph with a heavy heart. The crew was 3 men I'd never met, hired by my father. The captain was a man with cold, glassy eyes named Vance. He didn't look like a sailor, he looked like a soldier of fortune. On the 3rd night, the storm hit. It wasn't just a storm, it was a wall of black water. The engine didn't just fail, it exploded. The communication lines were dead before the first wave hit the deck. I remember the screaming. I remember the cold, the kind of cold that stops your heart. I reached for Chelsea's hand as the yacht tilted 45 degrees. "Hold on." I roared. But a rogue wave, a mountain of salt and fury, smashed through the railing. I felt her fingers slip from mine. I saw her white face vanish into the churning abyss. I dove in. I swam until my lungs burned, screaming her name into the gale until my voice was gone. When the Coast Guard found me 14 hours later, clinging to a piece of charred driftwood, I was alone. 3 weeks later, they found a body. Bloated, unrecognizable, but wearing Chelsea's wedding ring. My parents insisted on an immediate closed casket funeral. They didn't want a DNA test. It would be too painful to wait, they said. And now, here I was, standing at her grave, receiving a text from a dead woman. I didn't go to the wake at the expensive steakhouse my parents had booked. I slipped away from the cemetery, driving my battered truck through the rain, heading toward the coordinates sent to my phone an hour after the first message. Truro Beach. The fisherman's shack. Alone. I arrived at a dilapidated cabin hidden behind a wall of seagrass. The wind howled through the cracks in the wood. I pushed the door open, my hand gripping a tire iron I'd taken from the truck. "Scott." The voice was a whisper, but it hit me like a physical blow. A figure emerged from the shadows. She was wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, her face pale, her beautiful hair matted and dry. She looked like she had crawled out of hell. "Chelsea." I dropped the tire iron. We collided in the center of the room. She was shaking so violently I thought she would break. She wasn't a ghost. She was warm. She was breathing. "They tried to kill me, Scott," she sobbed into my chest. "They didn't just let it happen. They made it happen." She told me the story. When the ship went down, she didn't just fall. She had seen the technician Arthur hired messing with the lifeboats earlier that day. When the engine blew, she realized it was a setup. She managed to grab a flotation device she'd hidden in her cabin, fearing the worst. She had drifted for hours before a local fisherman, an old hermit who didn't own a TV or a radio, pulled her from the surf. "Why didn't you call me immediately?" I asked, my blood boiling. "Because the fisherman's phone was broken, and by the time I got to a town, I saw the news," she said, her eyes turning hard as flint. "I saw Mom and Dad on the TV, crying for the cameras, talking about the inheritance they would use to honor my memory. I realized if they knew I was alive, they'd finish the job. I had to wait for the funeral. I had to see if you were with them." "I would never," I hissed. "I know," she whispered. But Scott, they took out a life insurance policy on me. $10 million. Signed a week before the trip. And they knew about the hidden clause in my marriage contract. If I died without an heir, the money went to them, unless I had a secret will. I looked at her. Do you? I do. And they don't know it exists. They think they're about to walk into a courtroom tomorrow and become the richest monsters in Michigan. We're going to let them walk in. But they aren't going to walk out. The following morning, the Kent County Courthouse felt like a stage. My parents arrived in a chauffeured limousine. My mother was draped in designer black silk, her grief now replaced by an air of smug superiority. My father smoked a cigar on the courthouse steps until a bailiff told him to put it out. They saw me standing near the entrance. "Scott, darling," Margaret said, reaching out to pat my cheek. I flinched away. Her eyes darkened. "Don't be difficult. Today is a big day. We're going to take care of you, you know. We'll get you a nice house. Somewhere far away." Translation: We're buying your silence. "I don't want your house, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I just want what Chelsea deserves." "And she'll get it," Arthur growled, straightening his tie. "Justice. Now let's get this over with." We entered the chamber. The estate lawyer, a man named Harold Grayson, looked uncomfortable. He had been Chelsea's husband's lawyer, and he clearly loathed my parents. "We are here to finalize the estate of Chelsea Newman Vane," Grayson began. "Under the current filings, as the primary next of kin in the absence of a spouse or children, the assets would revert to Arthur and Margaret Newman." My mother let out a small, dainty sigh of relief. "However," Grayson continued, his eyes flickering to the back of the room, "new evidence has come to light regarding the nature of the accident. And we have a witness." "A witness?" Arthur stood up, his face reddening. "The crew is dead. There are no witnesses. This is a formality." "Actually, Arthur," I stood up, pulling a small digital recorder from my pocket. "I did some digging in the 3 days since the funeral. I went back to the marina. I found the man who helped your crew load the supplies. He was very chatty once I showed him a picture of the police station." I pressed play. A gravelly voice filled the room. "Yeah, the tall guy, Newman. He paid me $2,000 to keep my mouth shut about the crates. They weren't food. It was thermite. Said he wanted to scuttle the boat for the insurance once it was far enough out. He said the girl wouldn't be a problem." The courtroom went deathly silent. My mother's face turned the color of ash. "That's a lie," she shrieked. "That's a deep fake. Scott, you ungrateful little—" "And there's one more thing," I said, my heart soaring. "The judge asked for a witness. I think she's tired of waiting in the hallway." The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The light from the corridor flooded in, silhouetting a slim figure. As she stepped forward, the gasps in the room sounded like a collective intake of breath. Chelsea walked down the center aisle. She wasn't wearing black. She was wearing a deep, defiant red. She looked like an avenging angel. My mother collapsed back into her chair, her mouth agape, making a sound like a landed fish. My father's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. He looked at the door, then at the judge, then at the daughter he had tried to drown. "Hello, Mother." "Hello, Father," Chelsea said, her voice like ice. "I believe you're in my seat." The next hour was a whirlwind of glorious, righteous destruction. Chelsea didn't just show up, she brought the thunder. Harold Grayson produced the secret will she had drafted and notarized in secret months ago, after she caught her father looking through her bank statements. The will was simple. In the event of my death, every cent of the Vane estate is to be placed into a trust managed by my brother, Scott Newman. My parents, Arthur and Margaret Newman, are to be legally barred from the property and are to receive nothing but the memories of the children they failed to love. But it didn't stop there. State troopers entered the room. The recording I'd played wasn't just for drama. It was the result of a sting operation I'd coordinated with the Coast Guard investigators the night before. They had found the saboteur. He had been hiding in a motel in Detroit, waiting for his final payout. He had flipped the moment he saw the handcuffs. "Arthur Newman, Margaret Newman," the lead investigator said, his voice echoing. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder insurance fraud, and grand larceny. As the handcuffs clicked shut over my mother's designer watch and my father's wrinkled wrists, the mask finally broke. "You brat!" Arthur screamed, lunging toward Chelsea. The officers tackled him to the floor. "We gave you life. We fed you. That money belongs to us. It's our retirement. You owe us." Chelsea didn't flinch. She stood over him as he struggled on the carpet. "You didn't give me life, Arthur," she said quietly. "You gave me a prison. Scott gave me life. He's the only reason I'm standing here. Take them away. I'm done smelling the rot." As they were dragged out, screaming curses that would make a sailor blush, the courtroom cleared. It was just me, Chelsea, and the lawyer. The silence was beautiful. Chelsea turned to me, the adrenaline finally fading, her eyes filling with tears. "Is it over, Scott? Is it finally over?" I walked to her and pulled her into a hug. We were no longer the two kids hiding under a kitchen table in a drafty house in Flint. We were the survivors. "It's over," I said. "The house is quiet now. And the windows, they aren't going to rattle anymore." 6 months later, the Flint Auto Parts factory was a memory. I stood on the deck of a new boat, not a yacht, but a sturdy ocean-going research vessel. We were docked in Cape Cod, the salt air cleaning the smell of oil from my skin. Chelsea had sold the mansion. She said there were too many ghosts there, even the good ones like James. She used the $30 million to build the Newman Vane Center for at-risk youth back in Flint. She wanted to make sure no other kids had to be shields for their siblings. She walked out onto the deck, wearing a sun hat and a smile that finally reached her eyes. "Ready to go, Captain?" she asked. I looked at the horizon. Our parents were serving 20 to life in a state penitentiary. They would never see a dime of the fortune they had tried to kill for. They had lost everything because they couldn't understand the one thing that was free: love. I gripped the wheel, looking at my twin, my sister, my soul. "Ready," I said. We set sail, leaving the storm behind, heading into a sun that was finally, truly ours.